It was a cold winter evening, and the stars in the sky flickered like scattered diamonds, barely visible through the mist of the approaching storm. The sound of hooves against the frozen ground echoed in the distance, growing louder as the massive estate came into view. At the heart of this sprawling estate, amidst vast acres of farmland and grand buildings, stood a stable that housed some of the finest prize-winning horses in the entire country. But that night, something unusual, something shocking, was about to happen. A moment that would change the lives of two people forever. Inside the stable, a millionaire who had everything, luxury, wealth, respect, was inspecting his prized horses. His name was Victor Hayes, a man who had built an empire from nothing. From the outside, it seemed like he had it all: successful business ventures, a beautiful home, and endless opportunities. But deep inside, there was always something missing, something he couldn't quite place. He'd never had children of his own, and despite his success, he often found himself alone in the quiet of his massive estate. There was a part of him that longed for something more, something real. Little did he know that night would bring him face to face with exactly what he needed. As he walked down the stable aisle, inspecting his horses, he noticed something odd. A small figure curled up in the hay, surrounded by the scent of fresh straw and the soft, rhythmic breathing of the animals. Victor froze in his tracks. He leaned in, his eyes narrowing to make out the figure in the dim light. At first, he thought it was a stray animal or maybe a worker who had fallen asleep. But as he moved closer, he realized it was a boy, no older than 10, sleeping soundly next to his prize horses, using nothing but a pile of hay as a blanket. Victor's heart skipped a beat. What was a child doing here, in the middle of the night, in his stable? His mind raced, his thoughts a blur as he crouched down to get a better look. The boy appeared fragile, his clothes ragged and torn, his face pale and dirt-streaked. It was clear he hadn't had a proper meal in days, and his body seemed frail, as if it had endured more than a child should ever have to. The millionaire's mind flashed through questions. Who was this boy? Where had he come from? And why was he here, of all places? Victor gently placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, shaking him lightly. The child stirred, blinking his eyes open. For a brief moment, their gazes locked. The boy's eyes were wide, full of fear, as if he was expecting to be punished for something. But when he saw the kindness in Victor's eyes, something in him seemed to soften. He sat up slowly, pulling his knees to his chest, as if trying to make himself as small as possible. Victor, always used to commanding attention, was taken aback by the boy's timid demeanor. He knew this wasn't just some random child. There was a story here, a story that was yet to unfold. "Hey there, kid. What are you doing here?" Victor asked, his voice softer than he expected. The boy hesitated, clearly unsure whether to trust the stranger. After a long pause, he finally spoke in a quiet voice, barely above a whisper. I have nowhere else to go. The streets, the cold, they're not safe for someone like me. I heard about your horses, and I thought, maybe I could sleep here, just for tonight." Victor was taken aback. The boy's words hit him harder than he'd expected. The loneliness that had been gnawing at him for years now seemed to echo in the empty space between them. Here was a child, someone so vulnerable, lost and abandoned, seeking shelter in the very place he had once seen as a symbol of everything he had achieved. The contrast was impossible to ignore. The boy's desperation made Victor realize how far removed he had become from the struggles that so many face daily. "Listen," Victor began, his voice steady, yet filled with an unfamiliar emotion. "You can't stay here in the cold, not like this. Come with me, I'll take you somewhere safe." The boy's eyes widened in disbelief. "You would help me?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. Victor nodded, offering the boy his hand. Of course, let's get you somewhere warm. As they left the stable together, Victor couldn't help but wonder what had brought this boy here. Was he truly alone in the world? What kind of life had he lived? The questions swirled in Victor's mind, but he pushed them aside for the moment. For now, all that mattered was getting the boy out of harm's way and offering him a place where he could feel safe, at least for a while. Victor's mansion, located on the edge of the estate, was a towering structure with its own sense of grandeur. But tonight, as the wind howled outside, it felt less like a home and more like a place of solitude, a fortress of emptiness. The boy, still unsure of the whole situation, followed Victor inside, his eyes darting around the extravagant surroundings. To him, it must have seemed like a world far beyond anything he could have imagined. Once inside, Victor led the boy to a guest room, a place that would be his for as long as he needed it. He handed the boy a clean set of clothes and showed him where the bathroom was. "Take your time," Victor said gently, trying to offer some semblance of comfort. The boy nodded silently and disappeared into the bathroom. But as Victor stood in the doorway, looking at the boy's belongings, nothing more than a few tattered clothes and a pair of worn shoes, he felt something stir deep within him. There was a hunger in the boy's eyes, a thirst for something more than mere survival. And in that moment, Victor realized this wasn't just about giving the boy a place to sleep. This was about changing his life. But just as he was about to turn away, he heard a noise, a soft, almost imperceptible sound from the hallway. Victor froze, his heart pounding in his chest. What was that? His eyes darted towards the door, where he could make out the shadow of someone moving in the hallway. Had someone followed them? Was there more to this boy's story than he had initially thought? Victor's mind raced, the questions swirling around him like a storm he couldn't control. As he stepped cautiously towards the door, the boy appeared in the doorway, his eyes wide and fearful. "What's going on?" Victor asked, his voice low. The boy opened his mouth to speak, but before he could say a word, the sound of a door creaking open from down the hall interrupted him. Something was not right. Something was about to change. And as Victor stepped closer to the door, he realized he was about to uncover a secret that would alter everything he thought he knew about the boy, and perhaps even himself. To be continued, Victor's heart pounded as he took a step closer to the door. The hallway beyond was silent now, but the chill in the air told him something was wrong. He could feel the weight of the moment, as if the air itself had thickened with an unspoken tension. The boy stood beside him, eyes wide and filled with fear, as though he knew more than he was letting on. Victor turned to him, his voice calm but firm. "What's going on? Who's here?" The boy swallowed hard, shaking his head. "I don't know. I thought I heard someone, but no one ever comes here. It's just me." Victor studied him, his mind racing. The boy's fear was palpable, but there was something else, a quiet certainty that made Victor uneasy. Something wasn't adding up. He'd taken the boy in, given him shelter, but now there was a sense of unease hanging in the air that couldn't be ignored. Before Victor could speak again, the faintest sound echoed from the end of the hallway. It was almost imperceptible, but it was enough to make the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. A soft shuffle of footsteps, moving deliberately and slowly, as if trying not to be heard. Someone was in the house. Victor motioned for the boy to stay quiet as he moved toward the hallway, every step feeling like a decision that could change everything. The mansion felt different now. It wasn't just a place of luxury. It had become a maze of unknowns. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was no longer the one in control. Something, or someone, was hiding in the shadows, and Victor couldn't help but wonder if he had made a terrible mistake by bringing the boy here. The footsteps grew louder, and before Victor could react, a shadow crossed the hallway. The figure, tall and cloaked, moved swiftly towards the staircase at the far end, disappearing around the corner before Victor could fully make out its face. Victor's pulse quickened. His instincts screamed at him to follow, but something stopped him. He looked down at the boy, whose face had gone pale, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and confusion. "Stay here," Victor said quietly, not taking his eyes off the darkened hallway. Victor crept forward, trying to make as little noise as possible. Every creak of the wooden floor felt like a thunderclap in the tense silence. He reached the corner where the shadow had disappeared and peered cautiously around it. Nothing. The hallway was empty. But then a faint sound came from a nearby room. Low voices, muffled and indistinct, as though someone was speaking in hushed tones. Victor's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't just some random intruder. This was deliberate. Whoever was here knew the house, knew how to move through it without making a sound. And worse, they were speaking in a language Victor didn't recognize, a language that was foreign and unsettling. He hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do. Should he confront them, call for help? But then he thought of the boy. What if this had something to do with him? The boy had been hiding in the stable, alone. No one would have known he was there. Not unless they were looking for him. Victor turned back to the boy, his mind racing. The child was still standing in the same spot, his face now a mixture of panic and regret. "We need to go," Victor whispered urgently. "Now." But the boy didn't move. He just stared at Victor, his lips trembling. "You shouldn't have brought me here," he said softly, as if he had been expecting this all along. "You don't know what you've done." Victor's stomach twisted. "What do you mean? What's going on? Who are these people?" The boy shook his head, his eyes filling with tears. "I didn't want to involve you. I thought, maybe if I could just sleep in the stable for one night." Victor's mind reeled. Was the boy trying to tell him something? Was there something he wasn't understanding? "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Who are they?" The boy's voice quivered. "I'm not just some orphan. I'm running away from something. From them. They've been after me for months." He took a deep breath, gathering his courage before continuing. "I'm not safe here, Mr. Hayes. I never have been." Victor's blood ran cold as the boy's words sank in. He had brought a child into his home, someone who was being hunted, and he hadn't even realized it. But by then, it was too late to turn back. The house was no longer a sanctuary. It was a trap. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps grew louder again. But this time, it wasn't just one set of feet. It was multiple. Victor's heart pounded in his chest as he turned to look at the boy, whose eyes were now filled with an expression of dread. "They're here," the boy whispered. "I knew they would find me." Before Victor could react, the front door to the mansion creaked open with an eerie sound, followed by more footsteps, heavy, deliberate, and unmistakably familiar. Someone was inside. Someone who had no intention of leaving. Victor quickly scanned the hallway, his mind racing for a plan. He had no time to think, no time to gather his thoughts. All he knew was that he had to get the boy to safety, no matter what it took. But just as he moved to grab the boy's hand, a figure appeared in the doorway. A tall man with a stern face, his eyes gleaming with cold determination. Behind him, two others followed, their faces shadowed, their movements swift and calculated. Victor's breath caught in his throat as the man spoke, his voice low and commanding. "You should have stayed away, Mr. Hayes. This child is not your responsibility." The boy recoiled, his body shaking. "No, please, don't." But his plea was cut off as the man stepped forward, grabbing him by the arm with a force that sent a chill through Victor's spine. Victor stepped forward, his fists clenched. "Who are you? What do you want with this boy?" The man looked at Victor with a cold, almost pitying gaze. "What we want," he said, "is something you'll never understand." The words hung in the air like a dark cloud. Victor's pulse raced as he stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the man holding the boy. He wasn't sure what was happening, but he knew one thing. He couldn't let them take the child. Not now, not after everything. "What do you mean, something I'll never understand?" Victor demanded, his voice thick with anger. He wasn't used to being on the defensive. He was the one who controlled the situation. But this time, everything was different. His mind was spinning, trying to make sense of the chaos unfolding before him. The man didn't flinch. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, his eyes studying Victor with an unsettling calm. "You think you can just bring this child into your world, offer him comfort, shelter, like you know what's best for him?" The man's voice was laced with venom. "This boy is part of something much bigger than you, something dangerous. You have no idea what you're dealing with." Victor's heart dropped. What did he mean? The boy, who had seemed so fragile and helpless, was wrapped up in something sinister. But what could be so dangerous about him? He had been nothing but kind to the child. The boy, still held tightly by the man, finally broke free from his grip, stumbling back into Victor's arms. "I'm sorry, Mr. Hayes," the boy whispered, his voice shaking. "I didn't want to get you involved. I didn't think you'd understand." Victor's mind was racing. What was this all about? Who were these people, and why had they come for the boy? "Tell me," Victor said urgently, "what's going on? Who are they, and why are they after you?" The boy looked up at Victor, his eyes filled with pain and guilt. "They're part of a network, a group that targets kids like me," he said quietly. "We were all taken when we were young. They raised us, trained us for a purpose, but I ran. I had to. I couldn't stay with them any longer." Victor's eyes widened as the realization hit him. This wasn't just some street child he'd taken in. It was someone with a past far darker than he had ever imagined. The boy had been trained for something, but what? What was this network, and why had they been keeping him? Before Victor could process this, the man stepped closer, his voice colder now. "You should have left him where he belonged, Hayes. You've made a terrible mistake. He's not your son. He's not your responsibility. He's a weapon." A weapon. The word reverberated in Victor's mind, sending a shiver down his spine. This boy, a vulnerable, terrified child, was being treated like a tool. A weapon. Victor couldn't comprehend it. He had seen kindness in this boy's eyes, not violence. He had seen the innocence of someone who had been pushed too far, but not someone capable of harm. "Please," the boy whispered, his voice barely audible. "I don't want to hurt anyone. I just want to be free." Victor could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him, but he wasn't ready to give up yet. Not on the boy, not on the possibility of saving him from whatever nightmare he had been forced into. He couldn't let these people take him back. Not now. With newfound determination, Victor stepped between the man and the boy, standing tall and defiant. "You're not taking him," Victor said firmly, his voice cold. "Not without going through me." The man's eyes darkened, and for a split second, Victor thought he saw a flicker of something. Regret? Doubt? But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by a chilling resolve. "You have no idea what you're involved in, Hayes. You're just a pawn in a game you can't win." The tension in the room was unbearable. For a long moment, neither side moved. Victor could feel his heart pounding in his chest, could hear the boys breathing behind him, shaky but steady. He knew that if he didn't act, If he didn't stand firm right now, the boy would be gone. And with him, any chance of understanding the dark world that had held him captive. But just as the man took a step forward, a sharp voice rang out from the shadows of the room. "That's enough." Everyone froze. Victor's breath caught in his throat as a new figure emerged from the darkness. A woman, tall and commanding, stepped into the room. Her presence was powerful, her eyes hard and calculating. She looked at the man with an almost bored expression, as if this entire situation was a mere inconvenience. "Let the boy go," she said, her voice low but filled with authority. "He's not your property anymore." The man hesitated, his eyes flicking between her and Victor. It was clear he didn't want to be caught in the middle of a power struggle, but there was something about the woman that made him back off. Slowly, he released the boy, stepping aside. The tension in the room began to ease, but the unease lingered. The boy stood shakily next to Victor, his eyes filled with gratitude and confusion. "Who are you?" he asked, looking at the woman. The woman gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. "I'm the one who's been watching over you," she said simply. "And I've been waiting for the right moment to take you back." Victor's mind reeled. Take him back? What did that mean? The woman's words didn't make sense. But then, with a sudden, jarring realization, he understood. She was part of the same group, the network the boy had been running from. But why was she helping him now? Before Victor could ask any more questions, the woman's gaze softened, and she looked directly at the boy. "You're free now." "For real this time," she said, her voice gentle. "You've earned your chance at a new life." The boy stared at her, his eyes wide with disbelief. "I'm free." The woman nodded. "You've proven that you can make your own choices, and that's what matters. You're not a weapon. You're a person, and you'll be safe now." Victor stood there, processing everything, feeling a sense of overwhelming relief wash over him. The boy wasn't just some victim anymore. He was free, truly free. As the boy looked up at Victor, a small, hopeful smile spread across his face. For the first time, it wasn't the smile of a frightened child, but one of someone who had just realized they had a future. Victor felt a weight lift off his shoulders. He had made the right choice in helping him. The boy, once lost and alone, now had a chance at a life without fear. As for Victor, he would never forget the night he took in an orphan boy, not knowing that it would lead to a journey that would change them both forever. With the boy finally safe, Victor stood tall, his heart lighter than it had been in years. The mansion wasn't just a place of solitude anymore. It was a home. And for the first time in a long while, it felt like it belonged to someone.